Welcome everyone to another Internationalie podcast. Before we started, let me talk a little bit about the podcast. So the Internationalie podcast is going to be a space where different international students, prospective ones, as well as current international students could get a glimpse into the life of international students in the US or abroad. This week, I'm joined by Elyas. Welcome to Elyas.
Thank you for having me, Ruth. Really appreciate it.
Yeah, of course. Thank you so much. So before we get started, let me talk a little bit about you. Um, so Elias is currently a cloud sales representative at Google, originally from the Philadelphia area. His parents are from Ethiopia and Eritrea, and he has lived in New York for the past 5 years. He studied international relations and consumer psychology at the University of Pennsylvania, but pivoted towards tech in his career, working his way through roles at IBM, Salesforce, and now at Google. Would you like to add more to your bio?
I think you did a wonderful overview there, a
Right.
wonderful introduction. So thank you.
Yeah.
But no, that captures just about everything. I'm sure we'll get into more detail.
Right. Okay. Sounds great. So the title of our episode today is Dealing with Mental Health as a Child of Immigrants. So for us to just get started, like what is the first thing that pops to your head when you hear that topic, like dealing with mental
Mm,
health as a child of immigrants?
it's a really good question, right? Because dealing with mental health, first and foremost, takes a variety of different forms, which sounds
Right.
generic, but I promise I'll get into what that means.
Mm-hmm.
The first thing to answer your question, though, that kind of pops into my mind when I think about mental health is really focusing in on kind of what we want in life.
Mm-hmm.
I think as children of immigrant parents,
Mm-hmm.
right, being Habasha, I think
Yeah.
about what our parents wanted for us when
Mm-hmm.
they immigrated here. I
Right.
think about the goals that they wanted to achieve and the goals
Mm-hmm.
that they wanted us to achieve, right?
Mm-hmm.
And the stereotype always kind of falls into a couple key categories, right?
Right.
Doctor, engineer, lawyer, things like that.
Right.
But I think when I focus in on my own mental health, I think about what did I want to do when I was younger that I thought would make me happy, in my professional
Mm-hmm.
career later on in life and
Mm-hmm.
generally would leave me feeling fulfilled. And those are, I would say, kind of the things that pop into my head in terms of really focusing in on what is it that I think will allow me to live a really happy and healthy life,
Mm-hmm.
but also kind of deal with and manage the pressures that come with having immigrant
Right.
parents.
Right, right. Yeah, that's a very interesting answer because that was not exactly what I was expecting you to say. And it made me really think about also my own experience because when you hear the word mental health, especially like in the, Habesha community, that's a big like taboo and it's not discussed a lot. And,
No.
especially, we as international students or, kids from immigrant parents, sometimes we don't know how to deal with some of the challenges that we face because it's not talked about. We don't know who to talk to or how to find the help that we need. But as you mentioned, like trying to find the answer to like what is something that's going to make me happy professionally, personally, and navigating that as a child of immigrant and as an international student can be very challenging. So let's go back to like your, I guess, upbringing and like maybe talk a little bit about your like how you grew up and like maybe how like or maybe like the first time you encountered the term mental health or like when you started realizing what
Yeah.
that was.
Oh no, I have a couple of really good answers to that.
Okay.
So kind of I'll just focus in on my upbringing because
Yeah.
again, it's different for each person, but
Right.
I hope someone out there can at least relate to this.
Mm-hmm.
And my upbringing was relatively middle class. It wasn't anything kind of crazy on one side or the other. I would say I was probably afforded a lot of really, really strong opportunities that a
Mm-hmm.
lot of children of immigrants may not have been
Mm-hmm.
given the opportunity to. And I think I early on realized that those opportunities are very much a blessing, right?
Mm-hmm.
They do not come without sacrifice, whether it's from my parents, from other people. They're there for a reason,
Mm-hmm.
and I think it's very important to take advantage of those opportunities
Mm-hmm.
because a big part of what I recently discussed on a panel that you were listening to
Right.
is the element of luck in our lives, and how much of a role that plays. And I think the one thing that I think about within my own upbringing is, while there was a lot of luck in terms of where I went to school, to just the little things day to day that happened, there was also a lot of hard work and sacrifice. And that is something that was kind of instilled in me from a very young age. Now, with hard work and sacrifice sort of comes the element of mental health, right? How much is too much of one thing? My mom has a saying where she always says, too much of something is never a good thing, right? Whether it's too much cake when you're a kid, or too much running when you're an athlete, right? It's too much can largely never really be a good thing. And so I think that over years and years of kind of really taking to heart what the definition of hard work might be, and how much I really wanted to do, I think I reached somewhat of a breaking point and a burnout point. And this sort of manifested through a couple different ways. One being the way that I work in my professional kind of career, and certainly hitting a breaking point there. The other was actually a little bit more personal, and it was more so with my own friends. And that has a lot of kind of deeper roots within, how my family and culturally, like, we as a bunch of people kind of approach family and relationships. And there's also the element, like I mentioned, of hard work. So it's kind of a little bit of both.
Right. Thank you so much for sharing that. I think you touched up on a lot of different things, but it has, I think what you said about, hard work and burnout, and like that's when you like get a wake up call and you're like, oh, okay, like I have to prioritize my mental health, right? And when you said like too much of anything is not good, I think that's also like for me, I like the first mental health there was also in college. I also experienced it when it happened to me. Like I was involved in a lot of different and then I was reaching a breaking point. I was like stretching myself too thin, and that's when I realized, okay, hold on, like this is like I need some help. Like I need to reach out to someone to figure out what's going on, right? So, but as you mentioned, like sometimes it could be like even among your friend group, or even in your family, these topics might be hard to discuss. And so I wanted to ask you, was there, did you have a support system? Was there someone that you reached out to when you realized that you needed some help?
There absolutely were people that I leaned on. There is no world in which I could have, gone through a lot of my own mental health struggles without really, really important people in my life. And you touch on one really important thing, right? Like the idea of doing just a bunch of things for the sake of saying you kind of do a bunch of things. That idea, in my opinion, sort of kind of wanes on you, and it doesn't become as relevant, because you learn that. I think the older you get, and I'm not old, but per se, even though I'm starting to have like gray hairs here and there. The one thing that I would say is my biggest asset now is time. And so when I'm feeling like I'm doing a million different things, that might not actually make me that happy. That might not make, my life feel as fulfilled. And what I mean by that is, if I'm putting myself, let's say, in kind of the shoes of, let's say, a college student, for example, right? Or even a high school student applying to college, doing those 10 different clubs might sound absolutely great on paper, but I almost can guarantee that an admissions officer, for example, is looking at someone on a piece of paper and thinking, if they're doing 2 or 3 things really, really well, that is much better than doing 10 things on average, right? And so to be someone who really sets himself apart, I think it's important to have a kind of a unique story, and that unique story isn't just doing a million different things for the sake of saying you can write them down on paper. It's really deriving value in that for yourself. And that the more that people can shift their focus towards that, the healthier I think that you can end up being. There was a second question you asked that I'm now forgetting.
Yeah, no, I was asking, like, were there people around you that you relied on when you were navigating?
So There are certainly a couple of people of which probably, if I had time to go through each individual, we'd be here all day.
Right.
Um, but two people certainly that have helped me the most through this challenge were my parents by
Mm.
far.
Mm-hmm.
I think when you're a child of an immigrant, right, there comes that
Mm-hmm.
level of stigma with mental health,
Right.
and you talked
Mm-hmm.
about at the beginning. The thing that I would sort of lean on and mention here is I'm very grateful to have parents, not only just who are alive, right?
Right.
There are a lot of people in this world that may not even have that, but
Right.
I'm very grateful to have parents that support me
Mm-hmm.
in ways that are very understanding, in ways that they may not even understand what's going on with mental health,
Right.
but they are understanding and supportive of the betterment of me,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Mm-hmm.
And that is, I think, an invaluable thing to have
Yeah.
as a child, and certainly an invaluable thing to give as a parent.
Mm-hmm.
So my two biggest supporters in anything have always been my parents.
Mm-hmm.
Um, when I think about other people in my life, like I said, I would be here all day if we went through person by person.
Right.
But the common theme across the people that have helped me the most through my mental health struggles
Mm-hmm.
have been the people that have done the little things. And that little thing is checking in with intention.
Mm-hmm.
That little thing is sending me a reminder, right,
Mm-hmm.
of a certain something or a certain moment that has a lot of positivity and joy behind it.
Yeah.
That is calling just to have a conversation about something random,
Right.
right?
Right.
Or sending a gift, right? I
Mm-hmm.
had some of my closest friends do that for me.
Mm-hmm.
When I've had some of my lowest points. So
Right.
point being, the people that have helped you, they do the little things,
Mm-hmm.
which means they're probably there for the big things as well.
Right.
In at least my experience.
Right. Right. Thank you so much for answering that question. The reason that, especially for me, even asking for help or like even talking about the fact that I was struggling was very scary at first. And
Hmm.
so I feel like once you reach that level where you're like, okay, but I have people around me who want to see me succeed, who want, who are invested in my future, and they are there to help me. I think knowing that those people around us are rooting for us, I think it's really, really important for us to really recognize that, because whenever I was struggling, I had would support me no matter what. So I think also hearing that you also had that support system is very important. And this is just to say that just because mental health is a taboo topic, or it might be like very difficult for other people to understand, it doesn't mean that we shouldn't ask for help when we needed it most.
Yeah, and there's this idea of asking for help that a lot of people talk about when it comes to mental health.
Yeah.
But there's something in that that I don't necessarily always agree with, right? Because
Mm.
it puts the onus and the action on the person
Right.
that is kind of being affected. And I think that is important, and it's certainly something that needs to be done when it comes to someone who is at a low point with their mental health,
Mm-hmm.
making others aware of what might be going on. I think that is sort of a responsibility.
Mm-hmm.
But in terms of checking in terms of lending a hand,
Mm.
right?
Mm.
It's sort of a 50-50 in my head of how you kind of get through that. Like I said at the
Mm.
beginning, like there's no way I could have gotten through my own mental health struggles
Right.
without wonderful people around me.
Right.
My therapist being a big one of
Right.
them.
Right.
And so while it is certainly the responsibility of the individual
Mm-hmm.
to get help and to
Mm-hmm.
seek that help,
Mm-hmm.
it is also, I think, important for all of us when we hear a lot of these things going on with mental health to create a space in which we're
Mm-hmm.
able to listen and
Mm-hmm.
cultivate a space that allows other people to do that too.
Yeah. No, I think that's a very important point that you point out, because even as a friend, when you see someone else struggling, checking in or just messaging them could go a long way. And I'm glad that you brought up that fact. Going back to what you said earlier about being involved in a lot of different things and like burning out, I was wondering, like, why do we feel the need to do everything? Does that come from our experiences
Hmm. Yeah.
like coming to the US from Ethiopia or somewhere else? Does it come because we're international students, or why do you feel like we have this constant need to do everything?
Yeah, I think there's one actually very clear answer to this.
Yeah.
And it's because I've seen it in myself, I've seen it in friends, I've certainly seen it in family.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I think the need and the feeling that you need to do everything comes from a scarcity mindset that we all
Mm-hmm.
have as immigrants.
Mm-hmm.
And that scarcity mindset certainly comes from our parents' upbringing, more so not just from their upbringing, but also from the time when they came to this country.
Mm-hmm.
And when that happens, you're basically left on an island, right? If you could put
Right.
yourself in your parents' shoes for a second, they came with not very much of anything, probably stayed
Mm-hmm.
with other family or other people that they may or may not have known. They
Mm-hmm.
worked up and built, whatever net worth or money that they had, and
Mm-hmm.
they've effectively invested most of, if not all of that in some cases, in
Yeah.
us as children. And
Right.
what that leads to is, I think, an idea, or at least the thought process in our own heads as the children in that scenario,
Yeah.
leading to us thinking that we need to do everything and anything to make sure that we are almost repaying that to our parents.
Interesting.
And I think
Mm-hmm.
it's extremely noble and it's extremely honorable to feel like we are giving back to our parents, and I have done that in different ways outside of monetarily for them.
Mm-hmm.
But I think the more that we go down this rabbit hole as children of constantly feeling like we have to repay our parents um for basically a debt that they've gone into for us, I think
Mm-hmm.
it's somewhat doing both parties a disservice. I think it's important to think that way and to give back to our parents and show gratitude. But if we always feel like we're indebted to them, then we won't actually be able to showcase that gratitude,
Mm-hmm.
because we'll always be focused on what can we do for someone else or what can we do for them. And don't get me wrong, they are the most important people in my life for sure.
Yeah. Right.
But in order to actually give back to them, in order to showcase our gratefulness,
Yeah.
we can't actually be focused on them as the number one recipient of our work. It has to be
Mm-hmm.
us. And when we, I think, kind of see the fruit of our labor, whether that's monetarily, whether that's housing, whatever that might be for you, those are different ways that you can plan once you take care of yourself first.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah, I was like nodding every time you were talking, because I relate to a lot of the things that you said.
Yeah,
And I think this also applies to, and I've seen this also in college, like among other international students too, where, like there's someone who's involved in every single club, or like taking so many difficult classes, and like you're sometimes left wondering like how are they, managing all of that, but then you don't know their story, or you don't know what their background is. And for me personally, I remember like my parents, when we first moved to the US, my mom had to give up her job, and my dad was going to school. But okay, I mean, obviously he also had to give up a job, and so there was a lot of things that were sacrificed for us, like for me and my sister. And I realized that, when I got the chance to go to college, okay, I'm like, okay, I have to take advantage of this opportunity that's given to me. I have to do this. And there's this like big expectation that, I had for myself, as well as the expectation that my parents had and my family had for me. But I think the struggle came when I realized that, okay, like, who am I doing this for, at the
right.
end of the day. But I think that's a very hard question to answer, because you don't want to disappoint yourself, and you don't want to disappoint your parents. So how do you strike the balance of like taking care of yourself as an individual, your mental health, your emotional health, your physical health, but then how do you also like try to make them proud, I guess? Like, how do you find that balance?
Yeah. Um, Look, I'm not going to sugarcoat and say it's the easiest thing in the world to
Right.
do.
Right.
There have been many times where I've tried to do this and it has not worked, or
Mm-hmm.
I feel like I've not taken care of myself first. All of that could be true. The number one thing that keeps me grounded is goal setting. And
Mm.
it's not New Year's resolutions. It's not, just
Right.
saying, oh, I want to do this. Like, I'm very intentional when it comes to goal
Mm.
setting. And what I mean by that is, let's say I have a goal. Just to put it in straightforward terms, maybe that goal is to lose 10 pounds in 2 months, right? It could be anything.
Mm.
But the reason why I think a lot of people struggle with really finding themselves and finding what they want to do, how they want to, give back to their parents, how they want to make more money, all those sort of things that would probably in a lot of cases fulfill people. It's because I don't know if a lot of people have done proper goal setting, and B, I don't know if a lot of people have actually thought about what they really want. And it's a really hard thing to sit with yourself and think about what you really, really want in this life. And so I'll go back to the first point about goal setting. When I talk about goal setting, what I mean is, have you thought about what steps you actually need to take on a daily basis to achieve your goal? So if I set a goal for myself in 2 months, I'm going to want to lose 10 pounds. How often do I need to measure myself? How often do I need to go to the gym? What exercises do I need to do on a regular basis? And then breaking down the goal into actionable steps becomes a lot easier. And so if I need to go and do strength workouts twice a week and then cardio twice a week, that's great. I can plan my week around that and then the amount of time that I need to spend on it. But if I just say I'm going to go ahead and lose 10 pounds in 2 months, like that's throwing a dart at a dartboard. It means nothing. So that's number one. Number two, when it comes to actually thinking about what we really want, which I think leads to a more healthy life. It leads to a more fulfilled life, and it leads to a life that I think, honestly, our parents probably wanted for us, just so long as we are taken care of. I think that is probably one of the hardest things to do in life. In fact, it's probably not even something I've certainly mastered at all. But the thing that's helped me figure out what I do really want in this life is really thinking about the things that you don't want first and foremost, right? Whether it's professionally, whether it's personally. And then in the same way that I talk about goal setting, think about the things that do make you happy, whether that's going on a bike ride or talking to friends on a more regular basis, right? And then listing out the actionable steps again on a daily, weekly, monthly, whatever it is basis that will help you get there. And you have to have a way to measure that as well. So it's a very broad concept, but it's one that really works when it comes to actually measuring what you want.
Right. And that's a very, very helpful advice. And I don't think a lot also like take the time to break down some of the things that you can do to make sure you achieve your goal. And the fact that you're talking about goal setting, I think that's also I had like a separate episode about this with like another friend. Like we talked about the importance of like prioritizing what you really need to do, because a lot of times some of the goals that we have can seem very abstract, and if we don't have ways of achieving them, just having a goal is not going to mean as much, right?
Exactly.
Right. And I totally agree. Okay, so now let's go like to your college experience. So as a college student, obviously there are a lot of things that are demanding, and the first time most of us are away from home, wherever home may be. But how did you successfully navigate the challenges you faced in college when it came to mental health?
That that's a really good question. And if my friends are listening to this, they will know why I'm laughing. I would say college for me was probably the hardest part when it came to my mental health. There were a lot of highs. There are high highs and low lows. And I think the way that I sort of thought about mental health in college was, quite frankly, it wasn't existent. It was non-existent. For me, mental health in college was very much about recognizing that I even needed help. That was the process that I went through over the course of multiple years. And so when I went to school in a very pre-professional world, we were all sort of focused on what jobs you had and who was doing what as an internship. And again, that idea of doing more is better, along with the fact that you had to manage sleep, your social life, eating well, working out, all those sort of things in life that you have to mention. And it was very overwhelming for me. And I think my journey to recognizing that mental health was something that I needed to take seriously. It probably took place my last year of college, when I really started to see the effect that it had, not just on me, but it started to have an effect on my friends and the friendships that I was making. And that's when I recognized that I really did need help. And it was at that point that I said, okay, you know what? I need to reach out to somebody who's either been through this, somebody to help me professionally kind of get through my thought process or my thought processes, and uncover why a lot of those things, or a lot of those, negative feelings or just really difficult feelings were actually happening. So to be honest, that was the biggest thing for me, is navigating college was extremely hard from a
Yeah.
mental health standpoint,
Yeah.
but I didn't even realize the effect it was having until I saw it in other people.
Interesting. That's a very interesting take, because I think for us, when we are in college, we're like, oh, we. So you mentioned that you realized that your senior year, and that's like 4 years into college, right around when you're about to finish. And that just goes to show how, like, a lot of us maybe like don't even recognize that we need help when we need. I was just going through it, and I was like, I didn't know I had to ask for help. And I was talking to my dean, and she's like, oh, by the way, did you know that there's something called seasonal depression, and you come from Ethiopia, like, you're
Right.
used to the sun. And I'm like, what are you talking about? And so it
Yeah.
was like the first time I ever heard of that, because it was around winter, and I wasn't seeing the sun, and I didn't realize that the environment I was in was affecting my mental health, and that
Right.
I had no idea. And so I had to
Hmm.
research about that. And sometimes the things that we're going through or struggling with um, are things that we don't even know, and it requires you to talk about it to be able to understand how to help yourself out of your situation. And so I think recognizing the problem is the first step. So thank you for sharing that. But my other question is, so when you I guess, like, how did, like, your upbringing and your college experience, like, impact the person that you are now? Like, how does that in terms of, like, prioritizing your mental health now?
Yeah. Yeah. And I would say, to your point, right, I prioritize my mental health first, right? I
Mm-hmm.
prioritize myself before anything or anybody else, from the my daily routine to my day-to-day physical health to the things that I eat. All of it affects your brain, right? Everything is connected in our bodies.
Yeah.
So the thing that I think has shifted from when I was younger to now is my focus is very much all about, how do I stay healthy? How do I stay happy? Because if I'm healthy and happy, there's a very good chance that I'm able to help and work with other people in my life to make sure that they are healthy and happy.
Yeah.
From my parents to my partner to my
Yeah.
friends, all
Yeah.
those sort of things really, really start with me. So
Mm-hmm.
that was a big shift that I made from pre-college to now, is I'm
Mm-hmm.
focused on what I can control for myself, because that is the only thing that I can control.
Right.
Everything else is secondary. But I think that mindset has actually made a big, big positive change in the health of my relationships, to
Mm-hmm.
certainly the health of my professional career, and things like
Right.
that. Um,
Right.
that is all very true. I guess the one thing I'll add to your question, which was really about what kind of stayed the same from prior to college and in college,
Mm-hmm.
there are a subset of kind of core values that will never change for me, right? I'll go back to the very first thing that I mentioned when we started chatting, which was around the concept of hard work. I
Mm-hmm.
will probably, for my entire life, always do my best to work as hard as not only as I absolutely can, but harder than the next person trying to compete with me. Not,
Mm-hmm.
I don't consider myself an overly competitive person, but I do consider myself the hardest worker. And in that respect, at least, that's never going to change.
Mm-hmm.
But now, combining that with my own mental health values and priorities, I'm never going to overwork myself to a point where I I don't feel like I'm performing at my best. And that goes with anything from physical to work related to personal. I think that can be applied multiple different ways.
Right, right. Thank you so much for sharing that. That was very helpful. And I think when you talk about, like, working in a professional setting, I also wanted to, like, touch a little bit about your professional background, because I feel like now, working in tech, working at Google, I feel like these professional places, I don't have the experience, but from what I think and from what I've seen my friends go through, it requires a really rigorous set of self-discipline to be able to survive in these, like, corporate institutions. And so maybe if you have some advice for people going through or, like, working there, or people who aspire to be in a position that you are right now, how they can prioritize their mental health, or how can they can successfully navigate the challenges that they might face in the professional setting.
It's a really good question. I think the set of challenges that people are going to face in a professional setting are they're so wide ranging, it'd be hard to almost give a very specific answer.
Right.
The one
Right.
thing that I would say that's actually really kept me grounded, and I think we
Mhm.
naturally do this as not just, you know, Habashas, but people of color and people that are in a minority group.
Mhm.
I think finding a couple of people that you can relate to in any way in a professional setting makes a world of difference for not just you, but your own brand. And people can always, you know, say, oh, work really hard, keep your head down, all those sort of, like, yeah, that's all true.
Mhm.
But the thing that will, I think, make you happy in your work outside of whatever your core function is, because that's dependent on what you love. But
Mhm.
outside of that, if you can find, even if it's just one person, maybe set
Mhm.
yourself a goal of finding one person in your network, in your company, in your role that you can relate to on a personal level, whether that's because of your upbringing, whether that's
Mhm.
because of a sport, whether that is because of where you live or what you like to
Mhm.
do on the weekends, whatever it is, if you can relate to that one person,
Mhm.
that can make a world of difference in how you approach your professional career. Because,
Mhm.
I mean, the statistics show what 80% of jobs are found through people in your network.
Mhm.
You're going to build your network, your career, your professional, basically your professional network by
Right.
meeting and talking to like-minded people. So the more that you do that from the
Mhm.
onset, the happier and the more likely you are to certainly find success.
Right. And I second that completely, because even in my professional setting, like the fact that I had people who I can vent to or talk to about the
Mhm.
struggles of the work, I think was very valuable for me, because if you don't have someone that you could share some of your frustrations with, it could feel very isolating, and you're not going to enjoy your job very much if you feel like you're the only one going through those struggles. So I think, like, finding that one person, as you said, is very, very helpful. So yeah, thank you for mentioning that.
Of course.
um yeah, is there anything else that you would like to add to the conversation that you think we didn't get to?
I'll just add this one piece. People, when it comes to mental health, we
Yeah.
don't maybe talk about this aspect enough, especially in the Habesha community, but
Mhm.
also, just in general as children of immigrant parents.
Mhm.
Um, the idea of therapy is one that I think is certainly growing, and the idea that it's okay to go to therapy or it's
Mhm.
okay to see a therapist.
Mhm.
There's also, of course, a monetary barrier in a lot
Yeah.
of cases.
Yeah.
And people kind of talk about, like, well, it's hard to go to therapy. It costs a lot of money, which very much in a lot of cases is true. There's absolutely no denying that. But I think keep in mind that therapy is a process, and I think people sometimes lose sight of that. I've been going to therapy now for what year are we in? 2024.
Yeah.
Oh my god. So I've been going for probably 4.5 years now.
Wow.
And I wouldn't get or request a refund of any single dollar of that. And
Right.
that isn't to say that I haven't or have paid a lot of money for it. It's more that what I've gotten over years and years of help and work has allowed me to find real
Mhm.
happiness in my own personal life, in terms of
Mhm.
my work, to feel fulfilled. And it's also someone that can share some real insight into kind of how
Mhm.
our thoughts came to be, and
Mhm.
how we can think about different aspects of our life from a personal standpoint, from a professional standpoint, a little
Yeah.
bit differently. But I do very much recognize that in a lot of cases there is
Mhm.
a monetary barrier. But if you are young and maybe just coming out of college, or even if you're been out of college for a set period of time, whatever it is, um,
Yeah.
I would think about budgeting in a way where you could potentially incorporate therapy costs
Yeah.
into a monthly budget, a weekly budget, whatever it is
Yeah.
that you're comfortable with. So that would be
Right.
my last thing.
Yeah. No, I think that's a very important advice that you mentioned, and it also got me thinking, like, why do you think, like, there is this stereotype associated with going to therapy in our community?
I think in our communities, it's largely because there's this aura that you want to come across as the most successful with the least help. And
Mm-hmm.
I don't know where along the lines that started. Maybe it was a comparison thing from back home, from the tests that our parents took that were compared nationally with kids. I have no idea.
Right.
But what I can tell you is that I've seen that sort of rhetoric and that mindset in terms of, oh, so and so is a doctor, so and so does this.
Mm-hmm.
But in the same way that therapy is a stigma, it, I think, is also viewed as a crutch by our parents. And that crutch has never been a good thing in their eyes in terms of the success socially that you can talk about.
Right.
And
Right.
so as long as that crutch exists in their heads, and I think as generations pass, I think it will lighten up. I think therapy will hopefully become a very common practice in our communities. But
Mm-hmm.
until that, stigma goes away within our parents and that's explained to them through conversation,
Mm-hmm.
it is going to be very difficult to say, oh, I, am a so and so, you know,
Mm-hmm.
Harvard educated whatever lawyer, but I
Right.
go to therapy once a week, right? That
Right.
comes, it feels like it almost comes with an asterisk that says you,
Right.
for some reason or in some way, are not as
Mm-hmm.
successful as the next Harvard educated lawyer.
Interesting. I think that's a very interesting insight, and thank you for sharing that, because I also agree with what you said. Like, sometimes, this is also cultural, or it's not really something that people talk about. And so when you say that, oh, I go to therapy, people are like, wait, what? And so I think it does a good job of like breaking down the stereotype that it has, among mental health, because I think one of the main problems is because people don't talk about it, people suffer silently. And that's
Mm-hmm.
when, a lot of damage is done, right? So I think having this open conversation with your friends, with family, could go a long way in saving someone's life. So thank you for highlighting the importance of therapy and prioritizing your mental health.
Of
So
course.
as we're ending our conversation, do you have any advice for prospective or current international students or children of immigrants who are dealing with the topic of mental health?
I would say if there is a reason why you feel like you may be struggling, or there is something on your mind that you in some ways can't even explain, right? That might be symptoms of a mental health episode,
Mm-hmm.
right? Finding just one person that you feel comfortable talking to, right?
Mm-hmm.
Not necessarily saying you have to feel vulnerable with that person or anything like that. The one piece of information that I would say is, if you were to sit down and explain to that person how you feel and what's going on, there's a large chance that they want to hear how you're feeling and how you're doing. And you may not even realize that. You might think, because a lot of people think this person might not want to talk about this, might make them uncomfortable, it might make me uncomfortable, it might, it might just be awkward, right? I
Right.
don't want to talk about this with anybody. There's a
Right.
very good chance that the really, really good people in your life
Mm-hmm.
really do want to hear how you're doing. And that's a lesson that I've learned.
Interesting. Yeah, thank you for sharing that. And I completely agree. Like, I think if there's any that I could give, it would also be like finding someone to talk to about it, but also like recognizing when you need help, or like trying different types of things to help you successfully navigate. Like, it could be journaling. Like, journaling really helped me personally. It's like write down my thoughts and see
Mm-hmm.
the connection. And so for some people it might be exercising, or it might be talking, or group activities, or anything it is. I think I would highly encourage people to try new things and experiences that might help them de-stress. Yeah, I think, yeah, that's great. All right. So, with that, we end a wonderful conversation of our episode today. Just as a little housekeeping, please make sure to go follow the official Instagram page at Internationalie by Ruth, that is LIE, and send an email with your questions and concerns about being an international student to internationaliebyruth@gmail.com. Thank you again for tuning in today. Thank you, Elyas, for being a wonderful guest. Um, and yeah, I hope you have a lovely week ahead of you, everyone, and take care of yourselves. Bye.